Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 in Junior English, and we continue with our study of the essay with you in your hymnals on 1392, 1393, and following the Anna Quindlen text, One Day Now Broken in Two. Let's learn a few things about Anna Quindlen before we do the reading. Notice on page 1393, she was born in 1953. Let's read. A young reporter. One more example, again, of an important American writer that comes out of journalism. As a junior at Barnard College, Anna Quindlen already had a passion for words and an interest in journalism. When her writing professor walked into class with a stack of manila envelopes and encouraged his students to submit their stories for publication, Quindlen did just that. The piece she sent was soon published in 17 magazine, a popular magazine. The first step launched Quindlen on a successful career as reporter, columnist, and novelist. Before she finished college, Quindlen started working part-time at the New York Post. She took a full-time position at the paper after graduation, and within a few years landed a job at the New York Times, maybe the most famous paper in the world, right? In 1986, the Times asked Quindlen to write a weekly column. Life in the 30s is the next heading. Quindlen's column, Life in the 30s, ran for more than 2 years. Quindlen's discussions of politics and global issues showed a deep level of insight, but what most attracted critics and her growing fan base was her ability to discuss these topics with a personal touch. Her next Times column, Public and Private, won the Pulitzer Prize for commentary in 1992. Final heading, Life as a Novelist. In 1995, Quindlen left journalism to devote her time to writing fiction. She went on to publish 4 best-selling novels, Object Lessons, Black and Blue, One True Thing, and Blessings. Quindlen's fiction often centers on the dynamics of family relationships, a subject she finds especially compelling. Today, Quindlen is again an active journalist. She currently writes a column for the Newsweek magazine entitled The Last Word, in which she expresses opinions in her distinctive personal style. One Day Now Broken in Two appeared in Newsweek in 2002. Let's jump over the page, across the page to 1392 and level 2B, and our interests now are in literary analysis, the rhetorical language here. We're going to call this a comparison and contrast essay, so write that down in 2B quickly. A comparison and contrast essay. In a comparison and contrast essay, a writer analyzes similarities and differences between 2 or more people, topics, events. Effective comparison and contrast essays have the following qualities. Let's list 3 of them. 1. The discussion is not arbitrary. The 2 topics genuinely shed light on each other. 2. The discussion is balanced. The topics are of equal importance. 3. The essay follows an effective organizational structure. The author may alternate between the 2 topics in a point-by-point organization or consider each topic as a whole in a block organization. In this essay, the author compares perceptions of America in the days just after the events of September 11, 2001, and again 1 year later. As you read, you're going to use a chart like the one shown to the right to note the similarities and differences Quindlen discusses. Then, consider whether the comparison and contrast structure adds to the essay's clarity and power. Your reading strategy here is to relate the literary work to primary sources. For example, eyewitness accounts of an event may offer useful insights into a literary work about the same topic. As you read, consider how primary source documents, such as those on pages 1401 and 1403, add to your understanding of the ideas Quindlen presents in her essay. We do have some vocabulary words that are there as part of our study in 1392 at the bottom. Those will end up on the exam. I also like her quote on 1393. I show up, I listen, I try to laugh. All right, let's turn now to page 1394. One Day Now Broken in Two. The background information. This essay was published in Newsweek magazine 1 year after the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon building in Washington, D.C. Quindlen's column was part of a commemorative edition of the magazine entitled America, a Year Later. All right, let's go ahead now. We'll pay attention, follow along. And of course, we're working at level 1 summary to start with. Here we go.
One Day Now Broken in Two by Anna Quindlen. September 11 is my eldest child's birthday. When he drove cross-country this spring and got pulled over for pushing the pedal on a couple of stretches of monotonous highway, Two cops in two different states said more or less the same thing as they looked down at his license. "Aw, man, you were really born on 9/11? Maybe it was coincidence, but in both cases he got a warning instead of a ticket. Who are we now? A people who manage to get by with the help of the everyday, the ordinary, the mundane, the old familiar life muting the terror of the new reality. The day approaching will always be bifurcated for me. Part September 11, the anniversary of one of the happiest days of my life, and part 9/11, the day America's mind reeled, its spine stiffened, and its heart broke. That is how the country is now, split in two. The American people used their own simple routines to muffle the horror they felt looking at that indelible loop of tape. The plane, the flames. The plane, the fire, the falling bodies, the falling buildings. Amid the fear and the shock, there were babies to be fed, dogs to be walked, jobs to be done. After the first months, almost no one bought gas masks anymore. Fewer people than expected in New York City asked for the counseling that had been provided as part of the official response. Slowly, the planes filled up again. A kind of self-hypnosis prevailed, and these were the words used to induce the happy trance. Life goes on. Who are we now? We are better people than we were before. That's what the optimists say, soothed by the vision of those standing in line to give blood and money and time at the outset, vowing to stop and smell the flowers as the weeks ticked by. We are people living in a world of unimaginable cruelty and savagery. So say the pessimists. The realists insist that both are right, and as always, they are correct. We are people whose powers of imagination have been challenged by the revelations of the careful planning, the hidden leaders, the machinations from within a country of rubble and caves and desperate want, the willingness to slam headlong into one great technological achievement while piloting another as a way of despising modernity. Why do they hate us? Some asked afterward. And many Americans were outraged at the question, confusing the search for motivation with mitigation. But quietly, as routine returned, a new routine based on a new bedrock of loss of innocence and loss of life, a new question crept almost undetected into the national psyche. Did we like ourselves? Had we become a people who confused prosperity with probity? Whose culture had become personified by oversized sneakers and KFC? Our own individual transformations made each of us wonder what our legacy would be if we left the world on a sunny September day with a to-do list, floating down 80 stories to the street below. So we looked at our lives a little harder, called our friends a little more often, hugged our kids a little tighter. And then we complained about the long lines at the airport and obsessed about the stock market in lieu of soul searching. Time passed. The blade dulled. The edges softened. Except, of course, for those who lived through birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, without someone lost in the cloud of silvery dust. Those families living the embodiment of what the whole nation had first felt and then learned not to feel. We are people of two minds now, the one that looks forward and the one that unwillingly and unexpectedly flashes back. Flying over lower Manhattan, the passengers reflexively lean toward the skyline below, looking for ghost buildings. Is everything back to normal? Someone asked me in another country not long ago, and I said yes. And no. The closest I could come to describing what I felt was to describe a bowl I had broken in two and beautifully mended. It holds everything it once did. The crack is scarcely visible, but I always know it's there. My eye worries it without even meaning to. On September 10 of last year, my daughter and I went to the funeral of a neighbor we both loved greatly. We rushed home so I could go to the hospital where my closest friend had just had serious surgery. Someone else took the cat to the vet after we discovered that he was poisoned and was near death. That night, as my daughter got ready for bed, I said to her, without the slightest hint of hyperbole, "Don't worry, honey. We'll never again have a day as bad as this one." Who are we now? We are people who know that we never understood what bad day meant until that morning that cracked our world cleanly in two. That day that made 2 days, September 11 and 9/11, the mundane and the monstrous. Tell me, how do you live broken-hearted, Bruce Springsteen sings on his new album about the aftermath. September 11 is my boy's birthday. 9/11 is something else. That is the way we have to live, or we cannot really go on living at all.
All right, so obviously this is a topic that is profoundly difficult to talk and write about, and yet Quindlen does it with a sense of grace that's truly remarkable. Let's analyze this essay at all three levels, starting at level 1. What is the fundamental thesis, if we can use that term now since we're studying an essay? The major message. What is the fundamental thesis of this essay at summary level? What is it that she says about America in this essay? Of course, you could write down a couple of things. She points out that there's actually 2 days that happened on that day. One was what we would just simply call September 11th, when all kinds of normal things happened. Of course, we'll have to ask at 3B if you have any memory of this date in your own life and your own experiences, and if so, what were those experiences like for you, or the people who are adults in your life who maybe will talk about it with you as what the day was like. And then, of course, there's the 9/11. That's the experience of the terrors that happened on that day and all of the death and devastation that occurred. When we turn now to 2A, and we ask specifically about how this essay is working at themes and messages, we are met, of course, with a really compelling question. Who are we as a people now? A year after the national tragedy that was 9/11, who are we? Her answers, of course, are fascinating. Notice that she says, we are a people who managed to get by. Page 1394, second paragraph. We are able to say life goes on. We are people whose powers of imagination have been challenged, right? She makes the observation, we're not the same. And we never will be the same as a nation after an experience like this. Notice she says at the conclusion of the second paragraph, the day America's mind reeled, its spine stiffened, and its heart broke. Notice that that's the opening line, and then at the very end of the essay she quotes Bruce Springsteen's song about tell me how do you live broken-hearted. So this idea of a broken heart is central. There are a number of messages here, themes messages. Let's list them at 2A. Obviously, one is the challenge to live after a traumatic experience. Of course, the other side of this is the challenge to live with those who have died after a tragic experience. Of course, another major theme is that we are a people who are forced to have to accept either the optimistic view or the pessimistic view or some synthesis of the two, the realistic view as she outlines it in 1395 in that first major paragraph there. The question, did we like ourselves, is a compelling one as well. Going through a trauma of any kind, this essay seems to suggest, challenges us to look inside again and ask questions about who we are as a person and, of course, who we are as a people. Right? She says on page 1396 that we are a people of two minds now. She uses a compelling word picture. Let's jump to 2B really quickly. She uses a compelling word picture of a bowl, her favorite bowl. It broke, and then she glued it back. It does the job of holding things. In other words, it's functional, but still the crack is there, and she knows it, and she will always know it. The suggestion of this word picture is that even though we as a country moved beyond 9/11, it never for us was something we were able to overlook or get over in the end. It's constantly in the national psyche, right? The crack is scarcely visible, and yet obviously there. Of course, let's point out in 2b the other really compelling, ingenious way she writes this essay. Notice how she invokes her children. First, her son, whose birthday is September 11th, and then, of course, her daughter is mentioned at the end of the essay, and the day, September the 10th, the day before. And the ironic statement by her will never, again, have a day as bad as this one. Of course, the dark irony that the next day was September 11th, 9/11. Finally, let's ask how we relate personally to an essay like this. If we're doing any kind of learning, again, we're connecting new to old. So let's first of all ask about the relationship to other titles. Let's begin, of course, by asking, what is your 9/11 text? Is it a song? Do you have a song that speaks about 9/11 in the most powerful way? Is it for you a video? Is it for you a movie? Is there a movie about 9/11 that is the most compelling 9/11 text for you? Have you read other things, novels or stories or poems that are compelling? We often think about the ways in which other titles helped people get through experiences that are traumatic. So let's ask it that way. When we ask about national tragedies, one of the greatest, of course, national tragedies in the history of American thought, as we've already pointed out in an earlier lecture, was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln right after the end of the American Civil War. And the great Walt Whitman, who wrote his famous When Lilacs Last in the Dooryard Bloom, that speaks specifically about the loss of the great American president. For you, what is the text that deals with national tragedy or personal tragedy the strongest, the best? What is that title for you, and why? Of course, at 3b, we have to ask personally about any number of topics that are associated with this essay, relating it to ourselves. Let's begin, of course, with 9/11 itself. How do you relate to 9/11? What is your relationship to that day, that event? Do you have memories of it and the ways in which it affected you? Of course, we could ask it this way. If you were very young, it affected the adults in your life in profound ways. What do you remember has been said about the experience and how it kind of had a ripple effect? We living often, obviously out here in the middle of Wyoming, we're still radically affected by the experience of 9/11 on that day. Of course, the second question is, are you two people personally, because of a trauma in your life, because of an experience in your life, something happened and you had to find a way to get on with your life, and yet you were never the same afterwards? What was that traumatic experience for you? And to answer the question of the Springsteen line at the end of the essay, how do you live brokenhearted? What for you is the trauma of your own personal existence that maybe you would like to write about? Well, there you go. A challenging essay, obviously a sad essay, making us remember a sad moment in American and in world history. Anna Quindlen's One Day Now Broken in Two. Thank you.